Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our public meeting with regards to our road end study. So this time I'll call this meeting to order, and if I can have councillors Bodner and Wells move the agenda. Is there any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. Are there any disclosures of interest this evening? Seeing none, okay. So with regards to tonight, we will have John Hack from Sierra Planning and Management, our consultant. He will present his final road ends report, and then from there we'll get on to our virtual delegations. We have 9 people that have asked to come forward this evening, and then they'll be given 5 minutes each to make their comments, and when those comments are taken, our staff will be keeping notes and minutes on this. Any questions that come out of those comments will go to Public Works, and they'll include these in our staff reports, because I assume there'll be more than one that will come back to this council. And then we'll go to comments from council, and then that'll be the end of it. So with that, council, I'm going to put the, you have the revised?
We did.
You're fine with that? Okay.
Yes.
So if I could have councillors Danch and Bruno move that Corporate Services Department Report 2022-99 be received, and that Sierra Planning and Management review of road allowances as informal beach accesses road ends report be received for information, and that staff report back to council on specific implementation plans from the recommendations within the road ends report, and or bring forward capital projects for approval through future capital budget requests. So that's on the floor. And we have John here this evening. John, how are you?
I'm good, thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Good. So we're going to let you go ahead and present your final report, and then we'll go to our delegations.
Okay, thanks very much. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to be back. It's nice to see everyone in council chambers too. And let me just do exactly that. I'll see if I can share my screen. Firstly, I can indeed. Okay, so just put it on. Sorry, that's the wrong one. That's the reports. Just there we go. So hopefully everyone can see that now.
Yep, it's here.
Okay, thank you. So if everyone can see that now, what I thought I would do is run through the slides which give everyone a bit of a recap. I think part of my role this evening, given that council has seen me and heard a lot of the research, as have members of the public before, just to give a recap and sort of set up just the information base that I think will be useful for when the delegates come in and provide their commentary. So with that, I'll just run through and start appropriately at the beginning. And I think it's fair to say that this project, certainly from my lens, being stood back a little bit from it, has, it's courted a little bit of controversy, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, if anything, it shows everyone is attentive to the issues. So we reacted in good faith with that. So way back in 2020, we were hired and provided a work plan that was based pretty much on looking at the problems around Pleasant Beach Road, Wildwood Road, but then, looking at the other road ends as well, but from the lens of what are the impacts that are potentially damaging to local property interests. So the lens was really identifying things that could be done to try and ameliorate some of these problems from people coming in from outside the area to areas that were not designated as parks. And then in amongst that, all of the issues, the attendant issues of litter, garbage, refuse, noise pollution, parking, and general sort of disturbance. So some real issues, and the city was very much right to look to try and resolve that through a broader study. So off we went and generated an area within which we were going to assess. And we kept that pretty large, going all the way up to Highway 3 and all the way over to Lorraine, I think, and Holloway in the east, Lorraine in the west, and to do a survey of property owners in that area. So the intention was not, and it wasn't through sort of any sort of, underhand approach. The approach was that we wanted to find out what the property owners were feeling. And very quickly, that survey, which was not therefore public, it was sent out during the pandemic to property owners, be they in Canada or south of the border. So a lot of work and effort was done in that. And one of the things that came back straight away, as council will be reminded, was there was a real concern on the part of people generally that they were not being given the opportunity to comment. And for better or for worse, when we started the work, because we were focused on property owners, we knew the recreation master plan had been done recently, hadn't got into this level of detail, but had asked people about what their preferences were, things of parks and beach access and things of that nature. So we went on our merry way to do the work, but pivoted very quickly, I must say, with the agreement of the city to open up the survey to everyone. And that included people that didn't even live in Port Colborne. So the reason I give you all of this background is just to indicate, because there's been sort of sustained criticism of the method. And I think it just comes from a position of not understanding how the project started out and how we reacted very quickly and positively to bring in everyone into the tent. And then there were some issues about people not getting the survey. Well, if you lived in the zone, chances are you either got the survey, or if you didn't, we could follow up and we got it to you. If you live outside of the zone, you didn't get the survey, you had to go online, and that was part and parcel of this adjusted approach. So I just want that to be out there, because I think whatever council does in terms of taking on board changes that might come by way of recommendations for specific issues, and there are a lot of possible recommendations. So the staff report is really appropriate tonight, is to come back in due course with specific decisions for council to make. However that is done, the efforts on the part of staff and us as consultants have been nothing but in good faith. So with that, who were we actually trying to target from our original work plan? We always had in mind to have public consultation, but the survey was focused on property owners. But of course that changed, as I just said. But the public at large and beachgoers were important. Adjacent property owners, obviously, I just spoke to that. Commercial partners, so we spoke to a number, Shirkston, the restaurants, others in the area, even the BIA for its opinion, obviously the cottage owners, and of course council and management of the city. So this has actually been quite a hands-on process. So there, just to go back and discuss what I was referring to, you can see there we conceived this as a primary survey zone. Some of the results I'm going to recap for everyone indicate preferences expressed for people who live in the zone versus people who live outside the zone. So I hope those people who are concerned about some of the recommendations or what they think of the recommendations in this report are assuaged a little bit by the fact that we are very much listening to everyone. And I think a careful read of the report clearly shows that that's the case. Before I go any further, a quick note of thanks to people who did respond to the earlier draft of the report, because there were some contradictions that we had, and that's entirely down to me in getting a little over enthusiastic on some of the recommendations and forgetting stuff we'd written earlier in the report. So I appreciate those comments from everyone. But what you have in front of you is just an indication of, I think it's a kilometer radius from each of the road ends, and the road ends, just to go back, and so everyone is aware, and maybe for members of the press, if you're writing this up as well. Lorraine in the west, Weaver, Pinecrest, Cedar Bay, Silver Bay, Wildwood, and the Michael doesn't go all the way down there, so that dead ends, as does Empire. But Pleasant Road, and then for completeness sake, Holloway Bay Road as well. And those yellow dots you see there are just residences or property identifiers. So there were a lot of them within the zone as well. Straight on to matters of gate access. I just wanted to make this clear as well, because a lot of the comments that we received back, and again, a note of thanks to everyone who, for the report that was issued, I think 29th of January, and so there were comments provided through February. We got tremendous feedback. I don't class it as critical of the report. It was very clear on the issues of concern in substantive terms, so I'm going to get to all of that shortly. But in terms of gate access matters, just to clarify for everyone's benefit, there are currently gates in place. So 7 open, unimproved road allowances, which terminates at the lake. Those that have a locked gate structure to prevent, or to manage, I should say, vehicular traffic, Lorraine Road, Silver Bay, Wildwood, and Pleasant Beach. 3 are open, Weaver, Pinecrest, and Cedar Bay. Just so that we get it out there right at the present, we are not recommending any additional gates be put in place. We are, as you read the detail here, and we're quite excited about it, to come up and use new technology to improve how those gates function. So new locks, use of new technology, and new expectations on the part of everyone in terms of how the gates get used. They're not there to be simply opened at will. They're there for a reason, to try and prevent unwanted vehicular traffic. And I think that the issue to be discussed is what's unwanted versus wanted. And that, I think, will be a healthy discussion, and we've got some thoughts around how that gets conceived. But I wanted to get that out there. We're not recommending any additional gates to be put in place. And this is one of the corrections that we had. I had originally in the the earlier version had indicated that Weaver Road should have had a gate, and that was really just an extension of my concern about some of the safety issues or potential safety issues. If you're an unsuspecting member of the public that's not watching where they're going, that area has some things to be aware of. But that was a contradiction, because we've said in a general part of the plan that we wrote that we can manage without additional gates. So I just want to flag that and emphasize it. Going back to the survey, we still take a lot of value out of the survey, because we conceived of it as asking some really important questions about how you deal with the road ends, and I'll remind everyone of what those questions were. But we had, about 772 there survey respondents, comprised of people that live in that zone that I just showed you, and then anywhere else. Mainly, obviously, they were in the city of Colborne, the vast majority, but it was open to anyone that has an interest in the access to the shoreline. And just to give you a little bit of who we were receiving information from, which again I think is really valuable. 42% reported their property fronts directly onto one of the road allowances. So as it relates to this being a study about road allowances and how they're managed, not just at the beach, but further back, that to me was an important success story, in that we had people respond to this who front onto these north-south road allowances. 24%, so a quarter, live in the main zone and have frontage on the shoreline. So they are directly impacted by fronting onto a beach. Either they own the beach or they have access to it through deeded rights, so on and so forth. 83% live within a kilometer. So that those round circles, those sort of beige circles that I showed you on the previous slide, 83% live in that area as well. So that again is an important indication. And 57% owned longer than 10 years. And that, again, is important. These are invested owners. 41% of the main zone are seasonal residents. That, again, is important. Often, as you may well know, seasonal residents often are the most invested, in as much as, they are very concerned about maintaining their amenity, because these places are there for literally for their recreational and enjoyment, as opposed to where they live and work for the balance of the year. And 31% believe that they have deeded access to the shoreline, which essentially just means that wherever they live in their rights to the property, there is that they should always have maintained access to the shoreline. So when you look at these things, and I don't want to belabor these early slides, but it was really important for us to make sure whatever we come up with respects the needs that have been identified by people in the survey. And then going forward with the various consultations we've had, I think the work's been polished quite well in terms of shaving off any of the rough edges or the unanticipated impacts that some of what we've said previously may have had. So that I'm hopeful that some of the delegations will reflect on the fact that we're trying to sometimes address two opposing views: more access, less access. And we've taken the view, let's start with what we have in terms of access. Let's look at the problems and let's see if we can generate some solutions. So let's just go. These are, I'm not going to put in lots and lots of survey slides. People have seen these before, but I think this, again, I want to tell the story of what's important here. So a number of questions that we asked. And we asked them, firstly, this is true for people that live in the zone and out of the zone. For those that live in the zone there, why do you access the beach at the road allowances? And, we gave a number of different connotations for that. So one could be for walking to and from the beach. So literally going down, and you might take in the sunset or the view, or feel the breeze, whatever it might be, walk the dog, take the grandkids. It doesn't matter. The access is important. The public nature of it is important. Beach, enjoyment of the public land and the views. So, socks off, feet in the water, the stuff that we all do. Really important to people. 85% enjoyment of public land and views. That to me was absolutely salient as an answer. That's why we put the question in the first place. This isn't about closing off the beaches. This is quite the contrary. This is about finding out why it's important. Even though these are not parks, they're public. If you split those two words out, public and park, and understand from a technical perspective, a public ground is not necessarily a park because it's not operated and maintained as such, but it is public and there are certain minimums that are required. Then you can start to see the value of these road allowances in that way. Trailer access to haul boats in and out. So 30% of people in the zone obviously do that. And that's a fact. And obviously they do it, I'm sure they do it very responsibly. What we're really talking about are people that might get access to the beach who don't have any interest or less interest, or are willfully ignorant of the need to be respectful for pedestrians on the beach, so on and so forth. And so those are the people that we're trying to maintain some management over, so that everyone's amenity is not restricted. To walk along the beach, 94%. So some of these areas are obviously private properties in that they run down into the area of the where the shoreline meets the water itself. Not exactly a high tide, but I think they still use those terms: low tide, high tide. And the property boundaries go into the water. Notwithstanding, obviously, common practice is for area residents to be able to move around on that and walk on the beach as needed. And that becomes an issue of the sort of the unspoken agreement of property owners to enable enjoyment of the beach. And it would extend to some visitors that come down that aren't property owners, but act in a respectful manner as well. But there you can see, to gain access to the shoreline and walk, 94%. So it speaks to the public nature of the area, even though there are some private land holdings. And if the private owner wishes to enforce their rights, they absolutely have the right to do so. but it is a fact that people want to come in and use the beach, the beach. Accessing the property, a bit more of a technical one. People need to get around and into their property from the beach side, and then sundry other. If you live out of the zone, we ask the question, do you require ongoing access to the shoreline via the road allowance? And, you wonder where the 15 and 70% that say no, you don't need any more comes from. But in terms of those that do need access by both vehicle and on foot or want it, it's a quarter or more of people. I think it was encouraging that only about 4 and 14% require it by vehicle. So if you live out of the zone, obviously you're more likely to have a vehicle to access the beach, but only 14%. So the recognition is park it and walk. I mean, that's ultimately why you're on the beach, to walk, not to drive. And then on foot, and that one's the big one, on foot, 50% and 45%. So 50-50, people recognize they want access on foot. And regardless of the gates, as long as there are improvements to access via pathway to the road ends, what's in the report here absolutely maintains that principle all the way. In terms of the issues, though, just to go back to where the property owners looked at this in terms of some of the issues, we've kind of broken out a couple of them, just some of the main ones. There were parking in front of driveways. There was, sort of parking on the right of way in a way which was, wasn't necessarily in front of a driveway, but was still creating a bit of a challenge for owners. But just to focus on it, on some of the big ones: illegal dumping, washroom access, noise disturbances, and picking out the two main beach road ends that have the problems, Wildwood and Pleasant Beach Road. In terms of illegal dumping, 31% of respondents in the zone said this is an issue for us. So regardless of whether we treat these as public parks or not, or just road ends, there's an issue with illegal dumping. What are we going to do about it? Is a relevant conversation. And Pleasant Beach Road, 21% had the same observation. Noise disturbances at night, fully a quarter of those that responded indicated that there are disturbances. Clearly, those disturbances are not every night, but they're obviously enough to be something that there may be a need for a policy response to. Although obviously, if we are not enforcing these road ends as public parks, there is a general limitation on what can be done. Only general bylaw enforcement can be put to task there. So there is a little bit of a reality there that it's going to be a challenge. In terms of washroom access, that's one which it's a double-edged sword. To put washroom accesses in the right of way, if it's not just a sort of Johnny on the spot type seasonal portable washroom, it's something more significant. If you put something more significant in, it really is literally a stake in the ground. You're indicating that this is an amenity that has to be maintained, has to be policed, and it may not necessarily always be well received by those that live in the area. So it's a really tricky one. But at the same time, having some level of seasonal recognition of the need to get people into these washrooms in order to manage the situation on some of the beaches. So almost 40% of Wildwood said there was a problem in their view, and a quarter of people that responded in relation to Pleasant Beach Road. So just to take a breather here and focus on not so much the problems, but the solutions. Before I start trying to explain the numbers, and I don't want everyone to look at this and get confused. I'll explain what these numbers really mean. But when we conceived of the survey, again, from the point of view of how do we control an impact on the sort of misuse of the right of way. In other words, where not everyone is respecting everyone else's rights to be there and to enjoy it as a road end, as a beach, as a view, and what can be done about it. So we put out some types of things that can be done. And some of them were put out more as a sort of a straw man. We wanted to get a sense of exactly what the interest was. And one of those items was, well, why don't we just sell the road ends? And I know when we were doing the survey, there was concern, well, if you put that in a survey, what if people say they want to sell the road ends? What are you going to do? And our response was, well, we need to be able to put all options out there so that we can take options off the table, because we're pretty confident that the majority of people do not want to see their access way to the beach removed by virtue of a permanent sale, in fee simple to another property owner. And so we were very confident about that. So we felt that's why the question or the option was put on the survey, so that we could find out and get confirmation. And that's exactly what happened. So regardless of the right of way, what you can see there, if I just go to the particular, I'll just use my cursor here, the option was sell the road allowance lands at the shore to private owners. And that's sort of I'll see if I can, no, I can't expand it, but it's a sort of a gray here. So it's this bar here, it's this one here. It's basically the fourth from the left as you go across the chart here. We thought about breaking the chart up, but really this is the way to view it, everything together. And you can see here, whether it's Lorraine or Weaver or Pinecrest, or even Pleasant Beach and Silver Bay, with the exception of Holloway, all of those that responded did not, and those are people living in the zone, did not wish to see the sale of those road ends. And so those road ends, it was never going to be, and it will not be a recommendation. You can see it's not in the report to do that. So that was off the table. But just to go through some of the other options then, to essentially control access. This is kind of the view that this question addresses. And the options were fencing sufficient to prevent public access entirely. I'll come back to that because that's essentially the same as selling the road allowance, but it's quite not as final as selling it to somebody else. Maintaining the current policy of vehicular gates, adding more legal parking further away from the beach and or on an off-street location. The fourth one, as I mentioned, sell the road allowance at the shore to private owners. And the fifth one, partial sale, but retain emergency access. So what that would essentially mean is that if you had a 66 feet right of way, say you sold 33 feet of it, you still have 33 feet where the members of the public and emergency vehicles and so on can still get to the roadway. So I'm not sure, that's sort of a half-measured solution, but it was worth putting out on the survey, see what people thought. And then the last one was creating public parks. So as you can see, just where the bars are here, the second, so that sort of turquoise, Manchester City blue is what I'd call it. It's the same color as their soccer shirts, but it's that pale blue, where you see Lorraine at 51%, and they're all basically substantially larger than the other bars. That one is maintaining the current policy of vehicular gates. So I think what I just indicated to you that we're going to maintain that's borne out in the survey quite dramatically in some parts. And then the issue of fencing sufficient to prevent public access. You can see that it doesn't have a dramatic amount of support. It has some support, but I put that in the same category as selling the road allowance, that it's not something that has major support. What does have some support in different parts were things like creating public parks. So Pleasant Beach Road, almost a quarter suggesting possibly create a public park, and along with improving legal parking further away from the beach. Same really in Cedar Bay, and to a lesser degree in terms of overall numbers, but Pinecrest Road as well. So you start to see emerging a fairly careful picture of what people are willing to tolerate in terms of prospective changes. But what they're not willing to tolerate is severely constrained access to the beach. So therein lies the challenge. It would be an easy solution to any problems of unnecessary impact from outside visitors to simply say, okay, the beaches are off limits, but that is not how it can proceed. So in terms of the outer zones, this one is interesting. Just focus on that sort of that last bar. That's sort of I'm not sure what color that is. Sort of a slightly sort of faded purple. Creating public parks. So if you live out of the zone, you're obviously more willing to contemplate the idea of more legal parking, and possibly on an off-street location, and secondly, to create public parks. So that's entirely understandable, but you can see if I just scroll back up, it's a different picture for those that live in the zone. And so that's the challenge. We have to be able to maintain everyone's interests. And the way we conceived of this is we do not think in the beach area themselves, we should be creating public parks. And again, what I mean by that is a park that is operated and staffed and advertised as a municipal park that people can come down with an expectation of a level of service, expectation they can stay until, closing time on a park, that there's going to be washrooms, all of this stuff on the beach. It's about managing the right of way and messaging and educating people on how to use these rights of way. That's kind of the position that we've taken. We can't stop people, nor should we want to, but there are a number of ways, and it's in the report, that we can try and help indicate where the parks are that are operated as parks. And Nickel Beach and the one at just by Centennial Park by Cedar Bay are two such examples of those official parks. So, and I will come on to the recommendations. I'm not going to take more time than I need to, but I did want to have the opportunity to lay out in clear terms what our report is saying. We produced the report January the 29th, I think it is. Got lots and lots of comments from people through the month of February. Basically around 200 email responses of varying degrees of detail and explanation. So I think on behalf of, I know everyone at the city staff level, just a thank you to everyone that was able to provide commentary in response to the report. And what we did is, it's not possible for us to obviously write out and append everybody's comments, but what we did is we wanted to categorize them, because it's not necessarily about criticizing a report. It's about identifying a position in response to what the report says. And so we end up with two sides of the equation, literally in the responses. And the question is, how can the report respond to all of these concerns, if at all? And so we categorize them, and I won't go into the details, but it's in the report in terms of a large table that was produced. We categorize them in terms of, as you see there, a desire for the road ends to remain public. And the vast majority of responses can be broadly categorized in that way. And then within that, there were general observations about the ways in which it can be maintained. And some, comments were more strident than others. Others, some comments were, get rid of the gates, completely, we don't need them. And we've looked at those opinions, and we've made our opinion known in the report, which is, again, what do you have now? You have gates now. We're not going to swing the pendulum the other way just because people don't want gates. There are good reasons why those gates are there. Certainly, in our opinion, there are. It's a case of how you manage it and what the expectations are. So 196 people wanted beaches to remain public. As I said, there were positions taken that were sort of more strident than others. There were a lot of very good observational comments about the need to maintain access so they could get on occasion, kayaks and non-motorized watercraft down there. And in some cases, small boats on trailers to be able to get in and out of the water. In other cases, to be able to ferry family members that have some ambulatory constraints, things like that. So that was all very good and very helpful for us. And we categorized them as I said, general, and then there were specific comments related to each of the road ends. And so in the report, there's a very big table which indicates that. And we give some anecdotal comments, some of the leading or consistent messages that were written in regard to those comments. And then there are about 21 responses that we measured overall that cited a desire to further restrict access. So that's actually saying more restrictions in place. And that kind of dovetails with the survey in that, there wasn't a tremendous amount of desire to restrict access to the beach. There's a lot of desire to manage the roadway in such a way that everyone's needs are met. And then 36 people exactly had concerns over some of these amenities, including parking and access to washrooms and whether or not you should. Sometimes it was you should, sometimes you shouldn't have access because it's going to encourage use. So that's the nature of the last round of consultation. So we took all of that, we categorized it. So as researchers, we can understand it. And then we ask ourselves, because we're not going to be able to respond to everybody's specific concern, but in large part, do the recommendations that we're coming forward, do they generally meet these needs to balance, or do they not? And so when you've got, and don't worry about the numbers, whether it's a lot of people saying beaches need to remain public and others saying it needs to be private, are the recommendations that we're coming forward with, do they meet the test of maintaining access, giving certainty to everyone in terms of how the parking and the expected sort of behavior at the road ends, as would be encouraged by whatever amenities you put there. How is that working, and have we protected some of the property rights of those that live closest to the shoreline? So with that, the options then, and a lot of people have seen these options, but there have been some minor changes. So with Lorraine Road, there isn't a lot to say. I think the general concern of a lot of people was don't over restrict parking going up the right of way. And so the various options for parking enforcement need to be looked at. And that's one thing that staff will be doing to make sure that we're not unnecessarily being punitive in terms of parking. One of the general observations we heard, which I support, and I think it's a case of whether members of council support and the public, is the idea of time-limited parking and paid parking using technology to be able to enforce that. I think that's something to really consider, particularly when you consider that the other aspect of this is going to be an educational piece indicating where the actual public parks are for people to go to, as opposed to just assume they should and spend as much time as they want in terms of parking in any of these road allowances. And that's not just bland concepts of educate people on the website. We're talking about putting information and signage at some of the hot spots here, which will direct people, allying that with some paid parking protocols, making sure there's parking accessibility for those that need it to meet the intent for improved accessibility. Those are the ways that I think the situation for everyone can be improved and expectations managed. So with Weaver, just to confirm, this one is, as you can see by the pictures there, and I've had some pushback, people saying it's not unsafe, and I get that. People live and have utilized this area without any issue, but we're looking to have a conversation about what needs to be looked at bringing back some objective opinion. And so when I see a big water body, because it's an outflow, and the sands, it's a dynamic environment, the sands shift, the wall there, the sand wall will shift, and other kind of, where there's the canal there are some potential safety improvements. So it's got nothing to do with person management, but just everything to do with health and safety. So I have encouraged in the report that the municipality at the appropriate time can look at if there are any inexpensive measures to just improve it. It could be signage, it could be something more substantial. I think that's one of the things that staff can look at. So yeah, and we removed the recommendation, which was unintended, to say stick a gate there. So that's come off. Pinecrest, and Pinecrest for me is the one which I've kind of, if I had to defend any recommendation, this would be the one that I would defend the most, because just in putting my planner's hat on and visiting the area, this is one where there's a real opportunity to do a little landscaped node at the end of this without interfering with anybody's amenity, in fact improving things dramatically. So it would be a public lookout. It's geared more to those that are going to be traveling through these highways and byways by bike to take in some of the majestic views. A little bit of interpretive signage, a little bit of seating. You'd be gathering in ones and twos, over the course of a day. And the property owners, east and west there, have obviously been active in trying to prevent some of the erosion problems. And I think we all understand it. If anyone read the National Post today, there was a write-up in the of North Carolina, the Outer Banks, properties disappearing into the water because of erosion. Now, obviously, this isn't the same, but you can understand the desire of property owners to make their property as resilient as possible. And so there is an opportunity here, particularly to work with some of the shoreline engineers that are working for the property owners to really make an improved road end that caters to the public but maintains access. So you can see how small that right-of-way beach area is, and it can really create some signature opportunities. And these are examples from other parts of the world, just to give you some sense of what they're still quite informal. Well, I think we'd be envisaging something with a bit more stonework involved in it, but it's a definite project, and I think there's government funding that can be brought to bear on this as well. Cedar Bay, we're not really suggesting anything in particular here, other than to recognize that this is an access point, and the park, Centennial Park, is an access point, and there is a lateral land ownership east and west of here that gets used a lot. So it's about being responsive to people's needs, but maintaining the enjoyment of this area for the residents. Silver Bay, somebody has a gate, and it falls into the category of improving the use of the gate, along with the other gates that exist as well. You can see one of the issues there on the picture, if you can see that, and I stand to be corrected, but it's fairly narrow, and one of the things that has been pointed out is that accessing a gate, and you need to be able to meet the needs of those that have accessibility assistance devices, mobility assistance devices. And then so that needs to be taken into account. Now, in some cases, there's lots of room to be able to do that to the side of a gate. And in other cases, there aren't. And I'm just looking at the image here. This is one where I think there would need to be some improved solution, a new kind of gate that might need to be put in place to maintain that as well. But what you do for one, you have to do for all. Silver Bay there. So just to go through it. Maintain the limited access via parking enforcement, active transportation route. This is definitely one where the opportunity is, again, for people to meander down in ones and twos on bikes to take in the enjoyment. It has that kind of almost fishing village feel to it. But you can see that rather sad looking waste receptacle there. I think there's a way to just sort of improve things a little bit more. I would certainly would be I'm someone that would notice, and I think a lot of people would, if there was a consistent vernacular of design for things like seating, waste receptacles, signage, and do that on each of the roadways. It tells the visitor that people managing the beaches, that the residents associations are thinking about the consistency and the reputation that goes along with living in this area. So I think there's some things that can be done on the design front as well. And then to go to Wildwood, obviously a wider property, sorry, it's a 66-foot right of way, but a long beach, and therefore long and gives quite a few opportunities for either unintended trespass or purposeful trespass. So I think, as you will know from previous years, that you can see there on the pictures on the left-hand side, there are attempts in season to put fences up. Again, it's a dynamic region when you're this close to the water, and the sands are literally shifting. So we need to recognize there are limitations to that. There is a responsibility on the part of Shirkston to maintain its boundaries. It knows that that's in its interest to do that as well. From our view, what are the things that can be done? So firstly, make it very clear that this right of way would not be sold. It's recognized, and secondly, recognize that there is a demand for access, and you have to accommodate it in I think in modest terms, similar to what's there now, but just formalize things so that there can be some improvements to the amenity. We took the view that we heard that yes, washrooms are needed, but let's not draw attention to this location by putting in what would have to be a permanent washroom facility or a seasonal type porta potty. So we did that. So we've kept our recommendations fairly limited, but it means this is one where the gate needs to work better. And as you can see there's room either side of the gate for putting in improved opportunities for access if you're in, if you have any kind of mobility assistance requirement or any kind of ambulatory issue. So we don't need to always raise the gate. We just want to be able to raise it for the vehicles and for the and so I think there needs to be some reconsideration of the actual gate itself, but maintaining the gate. And then Pleasant Beach Road, which is one of the most important ones to consider in terms of recommendations. What I've put up here, and we're not going to focus everyone's attention on it, but it's in the report. This is the page of the report that deals with it. I'm just going to cherry pick. So just to go back, again, quite a deep right of way, very popular. The Shirkston property comes right over to the from the west, right over, creates a natural bay. In the off season, it's very much used by kite surfers and others. And there is the property owners association that has some property around here. There is a campsite just to the north. There is a restaurant. There are amenities in and around this area, as well as a range of private interests. And so we had to make a decision on this one in terms of our recommendation, and it was not to formalize it as a park, meaning not as an operating park, but you have to maintain the access to the right of way, and you have to be able to recognize that people are going to come. And so what do you do to manage? You can see all the cars parked there. What do you do to manage and improve it? And so the range of things that are being considered, I think, there needs to be, and as we say here, there needs to be a full recognition of the diversity of opinion on this issue related to whether you should or should not deepen the range of amenities that might be put in place in the roadway for Pleasant Beach Road. But we say it is recommended that the city consider improving the level of amenities to serve the area. This could entail seasonal washrooms if properly monitored and maintained. It certainly can include demarcation of the Shirkston Shore property boundary and the provision of parking prohibitions along the road that do not impinge on the enjoyment of on-street parking by area residents. Modesty in scale, I think, is the approach. Work with Shirkston Shores to ensure that it's not a porous boundary that people are piling into Shirkston from this right away and parking for long periods of time. That means there needs to be an approach to parking, as I've discussed previously. As I've mentioned for Wildwood, I think here is an opportunity for putting in some accessible parking and accessible pathway onto the right of way. You may say, and it would be a fair comment to say, well, you've just created a public park. But the reality is the demand is not going to go away. And so it's just putting in a reasonable level of amenity to improve the operation of the system. And I should just say that in conversations with some of the commercial operators, the restaurant, for example, there is an active willingness to consider use of their property to provide improved washroom and garbage disposal services, which I think would be a tremendous win if that could happen. That would be having someone who's there on site monitoring it as well, as opposed to just a litter and washroom facility standing out by itself, completely reliant upon the city being able to find the time and resources to go down and check on it on a daily basis. So that's where we are with Pleasant Beach. And then Holloway Bay Road, that one is, it's not accessible by car. But again, just looking at what's being done around, Town of Fort Erie has been sort of creating these little nodes of vistas, which are being sort of advertised as tourism spots. And I think this is one where a bit of joint working with the town can improve opportunities for trail access and maybe bike routes as well. So that is the presentation. What I will do is just stop the share so we can go back onto screen. And I appreciate everyone giving me the opportunity to go into this in some detail. And hopefully that sets up some context for the delegations which follow. So back to you if I can, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you, John. I really appreciate that. We do have several delegations this evening. There are 9 that have registered to speak, and then we have 4 written. Everything that is said or is written is part of this the report that's already been moved. Those will be written into those.
I'm not sure I can hear anyone. I don't know if you can hear me, but I've concluded the presentation, so let's hand back to.
Yep. Can you hear me now?
To the man. Okay.
Can you hear me now, John? No. Councillor Desmarais, can you hear us?
He could hear us to start. That's weird.
Councillor Desmarais? Try your microphone out there, one of you guys. Or Harry, you got yours?
Testing. Can you hear us?
Hey, are we good?
No?
Try now.
Andrew, can you hear us now?
I can hear you, but John's been trying to get through to you, and you weren't able to hear him.
Yeah, we could hear him. Can you hear us now, John?
Yeah, loud and clear. Thanks.
Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Glitches of Zoom sometimes. Okay. So as I was saying, we do have 9 delegations that want to speak. We have 4 written. Those will be put into the minutes of this meeting, and then we'll go through those. So I'm going to call these out one at a time. If our deputy clerk is ready, she can bring people in from the waiting room. We have Brendan Bolger. I think Gary's trying to get your attention.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Brendan. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. So you're up first, and you have
Okay.
five minutes.
Okay, great.
So go ahead.
I just wanted to say these are public beaches. I think everyone has an interest in our public beaches, whether you live a kilometer away or a kilometer and a half away or right beside the beach. I think under the 6 options, under the willingness to consider measure slide, 2 were forms of sales and 1 was a fence and 1 was talking about parking, which was just taken away. So I feel like there wasn't much to add or to like increase access. Whether we call them parks or not, I don't think it really matters. Like I go to Chestnut Park to shoot hoops. There's no bathroom and there's a 55-gallon drum that's blue there, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I don't really agree with paid parking. The Weaver Road ditch is just as big as the drain outlet. At the end of Pinecrest, I think that bush is already gone. I think it's already changed a little bit there. And yeah, I just I don't really see the need to do anything too drastic. About the lock gates, nothing about a lock gate says come and enjoy the public park, and I just feel like it could be more open and welcoming than a lock gate. And I feel like if we're gonna put gates there so that like people with disabilities or elderly people riding golf carts can't go there, I don't know if that's the best option, because just because someone might go and drive a car down there to get stuck on accident. So anyway, I don't see an obvious path forward, and yeah, that's all I have to say.
Great, Brendan. Thank you very much. Next, we have Carly Winger. Not here. Okay. Betsy Brady. Not here. Ingrid Copeland. Not here. Okay. Jay Cardwell. No. Rick Froese, Chair of the Lorain Bay Association.
Yes.
You want to let Rick in? Hi, Rick. How are you?
Might take a second for his audio. I'll try again.
Can you hear us, Rick?
This time.
There
Yes,
you
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
go. Yep, we've got you. Welcome.
Thank you.
And if you want to proceed, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I had submitted a written reply to the Road Ends report, final report in April. I'm the chair of the Lorain Bay Association, and we have 2 road ends ending at the lake, namely Lorain and Weaver Roads. I had, as I mentioned, I submitted the written report and actually don't have anything more to add at this point in time. I'm satisfied with the report. We had, in my written report, I had asked that we be included in the development of any detailed policies and plans associated with the road ends in our community, namely the ones I mentioned. And this would have to do with such things as parking policies, addressing the safety issues at Weaver Road, signage, and the installation of any garbage cans. So that's really all I have to add to the report or the submission to the report at this time.
Great, thank you, Rick. And staff have confirmed they do have that. So as I said earlier, the kind of the questions that you asked here will go to our staff as they develop plans as we move across the road allowances, and they bring those reports back to council. So they'll take those into consideration when developing those reports.
Thank you.
Good, thanks, Rick. Next we have Carrie Benvenuti. Not here. Chris Comfort. Chris is here. Hi, Chris. How are you? Can you hear us, Chris?
Yes, I'm sorry.
There you go. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Chris Comfort, I lived in this area. I'm the fourth generation on my mother's side, up from Pinecrest. I lived there for 20 years, and I've recently moved back here about 28 years ago. So this, the road end parking is near and dear to my heart. I'd like to start off, I was not impressed by the signage that went up for May 1st, but with the presentation tonight, it looks like some of the road end parking issues that I was concerned with are going to be addressed. The situation arose in 2020, I think, with the lockdown. 2021, the parking issues almost went away from what I could see. My wife and I walked the area several times a week. I'm mostly concerned with Lorraine Road, Weaver Road, Pinecrest Road, and Silver Bay. Those are the ones that I'm very familiar with. I think a solution would be 1 or 2 parking spots that are well marked, probably time limited, and the presentation tonight seems to go that way. However, as of May 1st, the signage states there's no parking whatsoever. In the local newspaper and on the city's website as well, parking is almost completely restricted, not just at the road ends, but from the Friendship Trail to the road ends. Starting May 1st, I visited those 4 roads I mentioned, really several times. There's definitely a need, not just a need, at least a desire to use those. There were vehicles parked on almost all of those road ends. I took pictures, I sent emails to the bylaw intake officer and the director of public works daily for that week. So there's definitely a need. Now, I wonder if Sierra Planning actually asked the people who were parking at the end of the roads why they were parking. People are parking there for visiting friends locally. From what I could observe, construction going on at the end of Pinecrest Road, several utility vehicles and construction vehicles there, and people just stopping for literally just a few minutes. I think well-marked boundaries to where the road end limit is and where the private property begins would be required. I don't think anyone has the right to trespass on the adjacent properties. And I believe that was a big concern in the survey, that people are trespassing, and a lot of people, when you see someone walking, you just assume that it's a public beach. One thing that was brought up in the survey in the presentation tonight is that the seasonal people have, I guess, a different reason to be there, that they're there for the enjoyment of the amenities. I'd like to mention that probably everyone in Port Colborne, and specifically the ones in the initial survey boundary area, we're in Port Colborne because we also are here for the amenities, and it's not just seasonal people that we should be catering to. It should also not be the people like me who live very close to the beach end. There's other people. My mother grew up on that road. She's 94 years old now, and I can't take her to the end of Pinecrest Road where she spent her childhood because there's nowhere for me to park. Someone told me, a counselor told me that I have to find alternate parking. Well, there's actually nowhere to park on Pinecrest Road. People who visit the cemetery, if they go by the signage, can no longer visit the cemetery unless they walk from north of the Friendship Trail, which is ridiculous. Anyone who is handicapped, if you just drop someone off there, where do you park to come back to deal with your handicapped person or someone who has ambulatory issues? I think the whole no parking issue, it should have never been brought up. I've lived in this area, like I say, for many, many years, and there's never been regulated parking at the end of the roads, or at least not enforced regulated parking. I think the the concern came up with the lockdown and the influx of people from all the other municipalities that were also in lockdown. So I think going forward, a few well-marked spots would be excellent. I see the bylaw officer not only through our neighborhood, but down these streets several times a day. So enforcement should be easy. The numbers are posted there. I've called the number, it works well. The bylaw intake people are very receptive to your complaint. So I think you have a very good system there. But I would just like, the last thing I want to say one more time is I hope we have a couple of spots, probably time limited, that the local people can accommodate a few of us sitting for usually a few minutes on the beach, which I've been doing for many years, and I'm not the only one, but I hope it doesn't go away.
Great. Chris, you're right at your time. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have McCready family. The McCreadys are there. Who's representing the family tonight?
Oh, hello. Yes, it's Marcia McCready here.
Hi, Marcia.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. As you know, this is near and dear to our hearts, and we've had a lot of correspondence over the last couple of years about this issue. We have had our property on the end of Wildwood Road for about 17 years and built 10 years ago. One of the reasons we chose that location was the accessibility to the road allowance and the shoreline. We have elderly parents and we have a son that has a lifelong disability. And the city was providing keys to the gate with a deposit, which we held very near and dear. And it provided a great quality of life for our family, and we got to enjoy it without any barriers at all. So these last couple of years, when some attempts to take that access away from us, it's been extremely stressful, not just for our family, but there are many others in our neighborhood that also have family members with mobility issues, and also families that just enjoy going down to the waterfront with some small watercraft that they would just tow down with a little trailer. But on the most part, our neighborhood, we're a very close-knit, peaceful community that enjoys using the waterfront very, very much. And we are very, very concerned about losing our access. Also, in terms of that, the world is moving forward about recognizing people of all abilities and not creating any barriers, instead eliminating barriers and creating more accessibility, opportunities, and choices, and not limiting them in any way. So it's a little alarming to imagine that those thoughts and those causes would go, I guess, kind of backwards per se. And since we have been there, we've accomplished this access without the barriers, and we're very, very grateful for that. And we hope that it will continue. In terms of parking, the last gentleman that spoke, we agree with a lot of what he said about time limited parking, and especially the signage part of the report in terms of providing signage for visitors to learn where to find the public beaches that the city does provide that have the amenities that they would need, like washrooms and that sort of thing, just to provide them with a full day at the beach if that's what they're looking for. Also, in John Hack's report, he does mention something about the gate not always having to be raised, but a space that would allow opportunities and an area for accessible mobility devices or ambulatory devices or small trailered watercraft and what have you. And I think that that option is the best of both worlds, because we also agree with keeping the area safe, and we've always agreed that the gate needs to be there, but we also need to have access through it. So the option of still having a locked gate, but an open spot that can be accessed with the accessible mobility devices or ambulatory devices, I think that would support both concerns and causes. Also, I just want to point out one more thing, if I have enough time.
Yep, you're down to your last minute.
Oh, okay. I'll be super
Thanks.
quick then. Thank you. In the report, I think it's number 2.3, historical bylaw mechanism, there's a section about access to Shirkston Shores, and it does mention that it is granted by pedestrian traffic only. I was at the last council meeting last week where that issue was raised, and a motion was carried unanimously that that issue is going to be looked into.
Marcia, we're actually not dealing with that. That's already been dealt with. Please.
Right, but it's part of this report, so I just want to make a note that it's in the report, and yet if this report is passed, that's not, that whole section is not ongoing right now because it's still being looked into legally.
That's correct. Yeah, that was direction by council at the last meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's inside this report.
No, I understand that, but I mean, I'm just saying that that's actually being dealt with by staff, and they'll be coming back to council with a report.
Okay.
So the rest of the report is really what we want to talk to, because that issue is actually being dealt with as we speak.
Okay. Well, I look forward to hearing the outcome of that.
Great.
And then I guess that section of the report can be amended however it's dealt with. Okay.
Correct. Great.
And that, our family loves the area. We want to stay in the area. We're retiring into the area, and we'd like to continue using the road allowance and the beach area as a complete family unit, as we have all these years. Thank you for listening.
Great. Thank you, Marcia. Appreciate that. Okay. And we do have Betsy Brady. She has joined us now. Oh, okay, Betsy, thank you. So Betsy doesn't have any questions or comments at this time. So we appreciate that. And nobody else has come into the waiting room? No? Okay. So that does conclude our delegations this evening. So now I'm going to go to councillors. I'm just going to go around the room to start. I'll end with the two ward councillors. Councillor Danch, do you have anything?
No, good listen. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bruno?
Clarification I'd like from John, if we could. John, there was an early slide there where you had, I think it was 4 road ends that had gates, and you talked about at the bottom line, I think, technology, some technology options. And then you had the other 3, which I think said not adding gates. So I guess what I'm querying when I looked at the slide presentation later on, were you talking about those 3 still being able to avail themselves of technology or not? Or do all 3 of those currently not have gates?
John?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. Thank you for the question, Councillor Bruno. Let me just share screen again.
Thank you.
Disable on that. Maybe we can try again. Thank you. Yeah, so here's the gate access method. So I understand the question is the technology. It's an interesting observation. No, I think what we were looking at is to keep it simple, and that, you know, Pinecrest Road, we think there's a really good opportunity for creating a landscape end to it. I mean, a real signature opportunity, kind of stuff that would be in tourism magazines as well. And Cedar Bay Road, you know, you don't have one there. And we've talked about that doesn't need to be there as well, and that's partly you know, resident interest in not having it there, but it's not there now. So we've taken the lens of what do you have now? You have controlled access to four of them, but from what we understand is it doesn't work that well. So I'm pretty excited about the opportunity for using technology. So it would be an investment of capital, and I think to Mr. McCready's point before, I think the idea that you can try and use the sides in a way which creates some other kinds of access opportunities for smaller vehicles or ones which are used for mobility assistance, that's important. That can be technology based as well. And what I mean by that is using fob access. You know, so instead of having keys that can get replicated or can be distributed and people can get access, or the gates get broken and then not secured. This would be about using things that you see in many places about having security access that can be changed every year. The goal here is not to restrict people. They have particular reasons why they might need access to the beach, but I do think there has to be some further consideration by municipal staff here as to what is the best way. If you restrict it just to you know, municipal consent purposes, to be able to get onto the beach, to get to the back of a property, to carry out some work, that's one, you know, legitimate use. But to the extent that somebody might need access a couple of times a year, or otherwise is a very local resident that is able to guarantee that they would use it on a weekly basis, but they are, you know, they're liable for any issues. They've got to be, you know, they're liable for keeping that gate closed as well. So there's things that you can put in place, which might seem like we're putting a bit, you know, a bit more of a legal obligation on the part of those that have keys. But I think that's what needs to happen to make it work effectively to maintain everyone's interest. And there just is a raft of technology that can be investigated to ensure that you know when somebody is using the gate. And it gets recorded, right? So, you know, they could be doing exactly what they're indicating. We need the gate. We're going to access the gate every week during the summer, and by using that, you know, fob technology, that can be demonstrated. So, yeah, that's really where I'm going. I think that's the next logical phase for this.
Councillor?
I don't know about anybody else here in the room, but maybe there's some folks at home listening. I think one of the confusions when you, in a particular part of your answer there, I guess, you know, gate and barrier. I remember one of your lines was, what you do for one, you do for all.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. But I'm thinking that where the needs of people at what you call open barrier-free road end can be the same as people in the top four. In other words, we don't want a vehicle to be able to drive down there, but we do want people to have access, or maybe it's their small watercraft and that. So I guess what I'm seeing in that line is, wouldn't we want to treat all road ends the same, in that we don't want vehicles being able to drive down onto the beach, i.e. cars, motorcycles, things like that. But we may want, on all or some, the ability for there to be, fob technology is a good one. So I don't see the difference then between your top four and your bottom three on that list. why can't they be hybrids and universal? Because I guess the first thought I had is that as soon as you make some beaches or some road ends one way and others not, what you may have is the tendency to drive people to the one that doesn't have the barrier or gate for which they don't like. And so I don't know, that just seems to be potentially moving a problem or maybe creating one where there wasn't, where if we had that uniformity, you wouldn't need to do that. I wonder if you could speak to that.
No, I really appreciate the point, and through you again, Mr. Mayor. I think we do very much want to avoid creating problems where they don't exist. If it's not broken, don't fix it is the other kind of tagline that we've tried to adopt here. And I certainly can understand where you're saying that we need to have some level of equity across it. If we were bringing in gates as a first step, and there were no gates, to suddenly itemize the 4 and not the 3, I think we'd have to have really good reasons for why we're doing that. But if you look at it from almost a practical standpoint, and it's backed up by the comments from people in response to this study, I think, there is a fact of life. Those gates are there and they serve a purpose. There's also a fact that they're not in these other locations. And I think what we have to have is a bit of a nuanced solution to each. So Pinecrest would not, in our view, warrant a gate, because we're essentially going to have a little bit of a bulbous end to the where it's showing that bush, if you recall the picture, putting a sort of a slightly raised landscape area wall, and all you could get down the side of it would be one emergency vehicle with a skilled driver that knows how to get to and from backing up. That's kind of the position there. It's a nuanced perspective for each one, and I think that ultimately is the best way forward. And when I said what you have to do for one, you have to do for all, I meant in the context of where there is a gate, I think you have the obligation to try and find a way that you can get people that are a bit more challenged in terms of accessibility to be able to get to and from without necessarily having to use a key and raise a gate to do so, which seems like a bit of a unnecessary thing if you can create new infrastructure where they can get around it. And similarly, you can drag a kayak and do other things where you don't need to raise the gates. So that's what I meant by that.
Counselor?
Yes, thanks. Next, John, I wanted to talk about my view is, and I don't know if this is maybe fully understood in the study, but we've gone to great lengths and learned over time that our 2 public beaches provide first and foremost free access to citizens of Port Colborne and first access to citizens of Port Colborne. So I think we've started on a basis of ensuring that that can happen for our citizens. I'm concerned that whether it's a lookout at Pinecrest or a washroom at Pleasant Beach, I'm not so sure we've come down on, do we want to drive people, drive them by, have them understand that these road ends can be used. I would like to drive traffic to our 2 public beaches. Port Colborne First is taken there. If you put a lookout at Pinecrest, I don't think you can differentiate between someone on a bike using the trail going there or it being a popular spot for people to drive to as a destination, or this is where we meet. I don't know that we've come down on what do we really want the road ends to be, and do we want to drive traffic there? Whilst these problems at road ends might have been there, they were only exacerbated through COVID and new people finding out. you can't turn back the clock on that, but I'm not so sure increasing their desirability for tourists, when we want to put resources and amenities into our two public beaches, is not counterproductive. I mean, this community in the summer, from a staff point of view, is loaded with beaches and things to do and promenade, and we struggle to keep up what we've got. If we're going to start bringing more people in and diverting them or pointing them to road ends, I just think we've also created a whole new level of service expectations and costs. So I don't know if we've given you the right format of what do we really want to be.
Well, if that's, again, great observation. So if I can just respond very briefly through you, Mr. Mayor, I think maybe that conversation needs to be had. But I will say that it should not be viewed as that we are seeking to make these high demand tourism spots. You heard me make the claim, and I think I would be borne out in reality with this, that we're talking about ones and twos. We're talking about cyclists coming down and spending 20 minutes down there and taking in the view, or someone driving down and taking in the view. This is not, on tourism en masse. And I think, to your point, we are making it clear that there is no instruction at the moment. There's nothing coming out of our recommendation that says that these need to be designated as operating parks. So the point about directing people to the existing public parks, and then therein, as many communities in Ontario have been forced to do in 2020 at least, and some of them in 2021, designate some order of priority for who gets access to those beaches. That's fine. So I understand the point. I don't think what we're suggesting, though, is to see these as parks, but they are little nuggets of opportunity, and Pinecrest is just one such opportunity, which I think if you did a design exercise and saw how it would work out, I think it's something that is a pretty neat project.
Councillor?
Yeah, I'm just concerned that there may be some unintended consequences to, it would be great if just people on the bike trail, went there and stopped for that view, but I just think that there's a whole cost component and potential unintended consequences. I'd much rather see that fellow or lady on the cyclist get into Port Colborne, stop at a restaurant and all that stuff. I know you can't be everybody, that's not necessarily their cup of tea on that restaurant, but I just, on stopping at the two public beaches, I'm just worried that we're creating a maintenance and standard of care that'll have to be maintained once we've invited more folks there. And I think it exacerbates the parking problem, which I think we've to a large extent worked well on, but still not there yet. I'm not so sure that the people that have spoken, or the people at the end of those road allowances, would appreciate us having to fight off more traffic when we could divert it. I'm just focused on driving attendance to our current beaches, and I just think we're potentially spreading ourselves too thin. But I'll yield on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Desmarais, did you have any comments or questions?
I did. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. Actually, there's one question that I do have that's come from members of the public, and that is, at what point in time will council be presented with final recommendations, and who will be sending the recommendations? Will they come via the consultant, or do they come via the staff?
Thank you, Councillor Desmarais. I'm going to go to Mr. Kalamutu for that.
Through the mayor to the councillor and those who that have asked the question, as per the report that's attached, or that the presentation is attached to this report, I should say, it is noted that staff will come back with the specific recommendations. Obviously, with Sierra's report, it is fairly high level, doesn't get to very specifics as to how it's going to look or construction, et cetera, et cetera. So those will come back with respect to, well, depending on what council notes today, those recommendations will be coming forward for future capital projects. But because of this, these particularly highly visible capital projects that would come, there would be some additional public outreach before anything is finalized. So as we move into each recommendation and specific to each of those road ends, the capital project would have a community outreach part to those capital projects before they're ready, before they're finalized. So staff may come forward with one of those recommendations to council for budgetary purposes, and then the specifics will be through public consultation.
Councillor?
Okay, thank you. So that, to be really clear then, we're not going to be receiving all of the recommendations at one point in time. They will come piecemeal as they come about. Is that correct?
Mr. Kalamouta?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as we go ahead to implement some of these recommendations and get more specific to what those actually look like, those will come forward individually.
Councillor?
Okay, thank you. Now, the other thing I had wanted to note is, first of all, I would always respect the what the majority of the citizenry wanted. That's really what matters, and with the special consideration given to those people who live there and have to deal with all the issues. In parking and the problems around that seem to be one of the larger issues. So doing something about not necessarily restricting parking in the truest sense of the word, but limiting it and putting some kind of time limit is ideal. And paying for the parking may be the way around some people taking advantage of it as well. So there's that. I don't think putting some amenities in is a bad thing. I really don't. I think we already have a maintenance and standard of care issue. I don't think it's a case of something being, of us triggering one. I think it's already there. So I do believe it's something that we need to acknowledge and start looking at on a few of the road ends, certainly not all of them. I think the amenities that would be put in have to be quite manageable and very low cost though. But certainly targeting those people who are at the highest need using those road ends. But keeping the accesses as open and as public as possible, I think is absolutely imperative that we look down that way and as barrier free as possible. But we do have to have enough of a barrier that it does limit vehicles getting onto the beach. So I think that the consultant's certainly on the right track. But when staff gets engaged in the minutia of it all, I'm sure that we'll get some really clean recommendations that will council will have some great discussion on. But that's all I wanted to say, and I do thank you all.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Beauregard?
I have no questions or comments at this time.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cleo?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to John. I just had a quick question. There's been a lot of talk about golf carts and different things, and I know that as an accessibility issue, for some people I know that that's the way that they do access the beach. You didn't mention it, but you did say about ways for people with disabilities to get to the beach and off of the beach and having extra, not the gates particularly, but other ways around them. Could you speak to the golf cart issue? Because I know that there are people that do access that way for certain reasons, and I know it's a big issue, and I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
John?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think this is a decision of council to how far you want to go down the road of, and it's just to make sure I fully understand the issue. This is one not necessarily of a technical requirement for having a mobility assistance vehicle, but one of convenience for as good an ambulatory capability as others, but they use it out of convenience as well. So I think that's to be honest, I think you want to be able to accommodate as many people as possible in that regard, so that you don't take a narrow lens on accessibility, because I think there's for a lot of people, accessibility is not it's not a black or white thing. It's a gradation. So I think it's perhaps what Councillor Desmarais had spoken to, is that there needs to be some crispness to the recommendations. It's just not possible to do it in this sort of general, almost master planning type environment that this report is. But I think I would just say that I think it's a valid issue that needs to be further discussed. Then along with it is the protocol of how you get to and from the beach, and what sort of investment should be made. Is it cost prohibitive or otherwise? So there needs to be some design work. I mean, we've thrown out the recommendation that, there needs to be a consideration for getting smaller vehicles maybe off to the side through some other barrier. That's fine. Now you have to kind of look at the design implications of that. I think that's how you make some decisions. Sorry, I can't be more prescriptive at this stage.
Councillor?
I understand. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Baggett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. One question, I don't know if it goes to Director Kalamutu or the CEO. The director mentioned things will come through the budgetary process, some things. So that means 2023 budget, I imagine, like for next summer. So in the meantime, I guess it's safe to say that the road end enforcement will remain status quo as last year, and with extra bylaw office enforcement and keeping up the tagging and towing, and maybe have the regional police there on special occasion, I guess holiday weekends like we've had, I think it was last summer. It's been so long with COVID, I can't remember.
Two summers ago.
Okay.
Mr. Kawamoto?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, just for another year, there have been parking restrictions put in place from the May 1st to the October 31st dates. Again, that is a temporary restriction. It is not a full bylaw, as we wanted to try this out one more year without a full restriction, just because, as the councillor mentioned, due to COVID. Now that COVID is waning, and hopefully in rearview mirrors, we'll have a better understanding of who attends those road ends, what the issues are under a quote unquote normal year, now that beaches are open in other parts of the province. So as we move forward with implementing some of these directions from council, or what is noted within the report per council's approval, we get to the specifics of not just the gates, but also what is going to be parking there, what the road ends will look like. For example, some capital project for Pinecrest, as an example, in what it will look like with regard to benching and meeting of rocks and boulders, protecting the shoreline, etc. So those, all of those things need to be engineered. Either landscape architect or engineer should be looking at those parking restrictions and get how to physically do those parking restrictions, whether it be through an engineering or a landscaping, how we're going to be implementing the PACE system if need be, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things do come down to some sort of design. And so as we move forward with those designs pending council's approval tonight, that's when we're going to take those individual things to council for budget. And then as we move forward with what exactly it looks like, we'll be taking those to the public before finalizing those type of things. So to answer the councilor's questions, it may be multiple years, not just 2023 that we move forward in, but what we're going to do is take a look within the report, see what we do to prioritize some of those road ends. But as it stands right now, other than that temporary parking restriction, it is status quo.
or sorry, Counselor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one other point. Remember Councilor Bogner mentioned it, the cemetery on Pinecrest, and with the no parking restrictions, like Mr. Comfort mentioned it also. So with the no parking restrictions on right now, I'm sure if Bylaw drives by, sees a car parked there and a couple people in the cemetery, they're not going to stop and ticket these people. I hope we have common sense like that, Mr. Mayor. That's all, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to John. John, just for a point of clarification, so that everybody hears, you made reference to Silver Bay being narrower than the other road allowances. In fact, I don't think Silver Bay is narrower. I think all the road allowances are the 66 feet. It's just the characteristics of Silver Bay that make it appear narrower. Is that not correct?
John?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. If you look at the parcel fabric, I'm sure the 66 feet is there, but you know, it had that sort of winding, descending Cornish fishing village look that when I was there, and it so however it has been you know, developed over time, it certainly appeared to be more narrower and and very attractive. So yeah, it's simply the appearance, not the fact, I'm sure.
Okay, and that leads me to just a question of maybe some of the input that you had received. Did you receive any input or considerations requesting for the road ends to be allowed to return to a natural state where they would not be basically maintained? They would revert back to what would Holloway Bay Road would look like? Were there any suggestions of doing that?
John?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think there were certainly comments made in those 196 emails that we received that were for opening up or maintaining public access. Nestled in there were some, as I said at the time, some fairly strident calls for getting rid of the gates and keeping it fully open. I don't think anyone called for naturalizing the actual road. Obviously, the beach remains in a naturalized setting. It's a dynamic zone. But in terms of the roadway, I don't offhand recall people talking about essentially allowing it to become overgrown or you know, the dunes to gradually push back onto the roadway. It's an interesting concept, and I know Holloway Bay has some appeal in that regard, but no, I didn't hear it here.
Okay, thank you. I have one last question. And in the report, you make reference to the need for the development of a toolkit of policies, procedures. But in your recommendations, there are no indications of what you would recommend be in the toolkit or the policies. Is there a potential for you to provide that for us?
John?
I'm just going to, if you don't mind, I'm just going to do a quick word search just to find the exact context in which I said that.
That's in page 3, in the middle column, last paragraph.
Right, okay. Let me have a read of it. Just to bring up to speed. While the issues and opportunities can be expected to vary across jurisdictions, common to all is the need to develop a toolkit of policies and actions that can be ensure effective municipal management of its land holdings. So I was speaking there in the context of what others have done. So yeah, your question is certainly an appropriate and fair one. I think we can. I think what we've kind of got general policies in the report, as you can say, general recommendations, and then we have specific, some physical, some policy related to each of the road ends. I think that's kind of the toolkit, but you know, there could be further consideration of, you know, what's the general principles of parking restriction, right, as opposed to parking allowance? What's the approach to on-street versus off-street? What's the approach to levels of amenity? So, yeah, I think it's a fair comment, Councillor. There could be some additional policies as opposed to specific actions that could be developed that might give you some flexibility going forward. It's a good suggestion.
Councillor?
And policies are one thing. I think when I look at it and I see toolkit, I think of what a doctor would bring if he was doing a medical call. I look at it from the perspective of the city having a consistent manner of approaching the road ends and assessing what is there and what is needed in order to accommodate them such that it's a benefit for the community, not only the local residents of the area, but also for the entire community. So from that perspective, I would be looking for some input, if possible, in regards to what tools I would be putting in my doctor's bag for the city.
Yeah, and if I may, through your worship, I think it's there in large measure. I mean, if you look back, what we're saying is these are not public parks in an operating sense. You have two parks in fairly close proximity to these. These are maintaining the rights of way. We're not going to promote the use of others. We're not selling rights of way. We're not fencing the rights of way. We're maintaining access on foot primarily. We're even allowing vehicular access under guided controls. So, and then to get to some of the things where there have been some issues. So Councillor Bruno indicated he's got a bit of an unease on anything which is promoting visitation. These are things that might need a bit more consideration around the council table. But now you've raised the issue, and I really appreciate that. I think there probably are, those tools or principles we could probably lay out. I think it's a good suggestion.
Councillor?
That's it. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bodnar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think we got a good start, a good place to come from here and look at different things. It's clear that the next council will be making a majority of these decisions, and that's fine. For some of us that will be here and some of us that won't be here, we can certainly put our input in before that council is formed. Also, I was glad Angie asked about the timelines. I had that down on my pad here. And the next steps, I think we need to chew this up individually as we look at each piece of this. And Mr. Mayor, through you, I do have a question to John. John, in your April 2022 report, on page 49, Cedar Bay Road, and you indicated that because when you go down to the end of the cut or the road end at Cedar Bay, there are two parcels there that run east and west, and full disclosure, I live on the one that runs east, and you do say both parcels are properties owned by the estate of individuals likely deceased. I would just remind you that I'm still here, and the other 21 families in Walnut Park subdivision are all alive and kicking also. So that part is owned by the subdivision of Walnut Park, and I understand that likely deceased talks more to the part running west to Centennial Park. If I'm wrong in that, let me know, but I don't think I am.
So, Counselor, I think the CIO can,
Is John still there? I know.
I think the CIO can give us a little bit of insight on that.
Sure.
So you're talking east and west of
Right.
Cedar Bay.
Yep.
As we know, west is owned by a person that is no longer with us, but
Right.
it is deeded for use of the subdivision that was created back in around 1921, with also use of that beach by park goers to Centennial Park,
Right.
as opposed to east side of the Cedar Bay Road allowance. Mr. CAO.
Through your worship to Councillor Bodnar, I think the best way to put it is, and I'll try to be as quick as possible, there are, as we know, from Fort Erie all the way to Haldimand County, all different ownerships. Some people own the land in front of the sand in front of their break wall, or south of their break wall. Some people own to the high water mark, the low water mark, the water's edge, a certain amount of distance into the water. And sometimes people, individuals or even sometimes a numbered company, a landlord or something, owns in front of other people's homes or cottages, and that's very confusing. We know of a few cases, these are two of them, where the estate of a deceased person is still the legal owner of property, but has, when they were alive, permitted the use or granted the right of access to either neighbors or other people. For example, people across the road who don't have frontage on the sand. Or in the case of the parcel that's on the west end of the road allowance there, users of Centennial Park. We also know of situations where the use is not public. So a right of access has been granted to a group of people. That people includes homeowners in the local area or across the road or a certain subdivision, but it doesn't include the public. And so I think that's the difference between the piece that's west of the road allowance and the piece that's east of the road allowance. The true definition here in the book or in the report, it's right, but what it doesn't go so far as to say is that on the east, there is not a public right of access, on the west there is.
Counselor?
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you. Thank you, that's good. And so, next steps moving forward, Mr. Kawamoto indicated that pieces of this will come to us depending on whether it needs money or whether it's something we can look at. I would hope that we could look at the parking and either tweak it or fine tune it as we move ahead here, because we know that there is still a little bit of, well, there's something that we could do, I think, to improve what we had put in place. So I'm hoping that we can get on that in a timely manner. Whether it be put a designated handicap parking spot, just for an example, at the end of, say, Pinecrest Road, with a time limit on it, so that if someone wants to visit the beach, we heard from Mr. Comfort that, that certainly his mom, who I'm very familiar with, would like to visit that beach, and he doesn't want to illegally do something, and I know him, and he wouldn't want to illegally park down there. But that's just one example, and I know Wildwood and Pleasant Beach may have need for some handicap parking there or something too. So I hope we don't just put that off till next year, and we can deal with those one-offs, even while we work into this summer. So I'll wait. I know we're going to have some good discussions on this yet for each piece that's been presented. And I think the other thing we've learned is that each one of these road ends is a neighborhood. Each one has its own little pieces that work and don't work. And The residents around there take ownership of that. They have forever. So when something happens down there, they'll be on the phone to Harry and I, but more than likely to bylaw right away to get things corrected. So it's an ongoing thing. No matter what we do, the residents there take ownership of that, and we'll make sure if there's something wrong that they let us know. So that's it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. So we've heard from our delegations, we've heard questions from council and comments from council. Just to make sure, Councillor Demery, I know she, by the time she was zoomed in, she may have missed, but we do have the motion for final roads report 2022-99, moved by Councillors Danch and Bruno. Anything further, councillors? Did you hear me read that out earlier, Councillor Demery?
I did, Mr. Mayor. I came in just before that.
Okay, perfect, good. So everybody understands that, how this will move forward. Oh, sorry, Councillor?
Mr. Mayor, just because someone may have joined
You want me to read that
the
out?
party late,
Yep.
can you actually read that?
Perfect, thank you, Councillor. That Corporate Services Department Report 2022-99 be received, and that Sierra Planning and Management review of road allowances as informal beach accesses, road ends report, be received for information. And that staff report back to council on specific implementation plans from the recommendations within the road ends report and or bring forward capital projects for approval through future capital budget requests. Okay? Councillor?
Just a question, your mayor. Would there be a time frame that would be associated to that for them to respond, or is that just going to be left open?
As far as Mr. Kalamoto bringing that forward, if you guys wish to put a time frame on it, I would suggest that you add it now.
I can't do that myself right now, but
Mr. Kalamuta? So with regards to the question from Councillor Wells as far as timing on this, how do you wish to move forward with it, or do you want to do it in conjunction with council as far as how we move things forward?
Can I speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead. CAO?
So sorry, through your worship to Councillor Wells, and I don't know if I'm going to be handing Chris a hand up or a problem here. I think our staff sort of vision, and we've had some meetings about this internally, is as Chris said about John's report, it's very high level and the detail will come later. We've been taking the approach that it's not going to be a certain day or a certain time that all of these recommendations will be implemented, but this will be almost like a master plan. We have the city, say for example, arts and culture master plan, and if that says, a sculpture garden at a facility or an art crawl in the summertime or something like that, you'll get reports on a sort of ad hoc basis or a piecemeal basis that sort of say, because of the arts and culture master plan, we're planning the art crawl for such and such a date. So you might see a report from Chris that says we're going to deploy 30 trash receptacles because that's what's in the road end study. Or you might see, we're doing the gates, or we're doing the locks, or we're trimming the trees, and so I think it will be at all different points in time. I understand that the public or council members might like to see some things prioritized ahead of or behind other things. And I think the time to do that is maybe in a council meeting by a motion. So for example, we talked about accessible parking spots, and sort of the council member said, Councillor Bonner said, I don't want that to be too far down the road. I suppose that Chris has heard that loud and clear, but if it's ever a case, we sometimes have a motion here that a disabled parking spot, an accessible parking spot be put near Steele Street School or near Sobeys grocery store. And there's no reason that a council member couldn't bring that forward as a motion to council or staff direction at a juncture before public works staff has recommended that. So I think we're going to see, whether it's 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, all different projects taking place as a result of the high level recommendations that are before you in the report. And I'll let Chris can tell me if I said everything wrong.
Mr. Kalamuta?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would never tell the CEO that he's said anything wrong. I think with regard to the specifics, obviously this particular plan from Sierra Planning, John and his team, are more of a strategic plan for those road ends. Now we have to get into the specifics of each of those particular areas and the projects that are required. We've heard loud and clear now through John's work, Sierra Planning's work, with regard to what the public are looking for and looking for importance. We've also heard the questions and comments from council today. So staff will then prioritize things such as parking and gates and move down sort of the list as we move forward. So one of those, and also which road ends in particular are in need of those capital projects the most for prioritization. So those will come as early as the 2023 capital requests. Now, again, even if something looking at parking restrictions as an example, what I'd like to do is go back and say how we can engineer or physically restrict parking or physically allow parking so that we don't just rely on bylaw officers to actually be there, that there may be a physical restriction only to allow parking in such places or restrict parking in other places, as an example. So we're going to try to maximize the capital and the configuration of those road ends, as opposed to relying more on operational dollars and operational matters with respect to calling in staff. If we can engineer things or create things through landscape architecture, through the recommendations from this report, that would be all the better. And again, those things, they do cost some capital money, and I think that the capital projects is a more appropriate place for those to be requested for that money. If there are any things that can be done in a quicker basis with operational money, and again, we do have some of that, then that would move forward maybe a little bit more quickly. But as you have all seen, it is a lot to digest out of this report, and staff will also have to do the same and also come up with a plan and a configuration of how to implement some of these recommendations in the most appropriate way.
Councillor?
Thank you. I look forward to seeing the priority list on this for our budgets. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Walls. Anything further? Seeing none, all in favor, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous. So with that being said, Council, we thank everybody for attending tonight, whether you're a delegation or just watching through our Zoom on our WeeStream site. And we thank you again for coming. And if you need to send something in, please get it into the clerk's department and they'll pass it along to staff if you have any comments. And Council, always please send your comments to either Mr. Kalamoto or through the clerk's department with regards to this so they can get that to the proper staff members. Other than that, that's it. We are now